So we're shifting away from the itty bitty teeny tiny, and we're gonna go up a level, get a little bit bigger. So at this point, we've already talked about macromolecules, we've talked about DNA, we've talked about the cell, but let's step it up. This is gonna be our transition into the different organ systems. But before we talk about the organ systems, we need to talk about the clumps of cells that make up those organs. So for this lab, we'll be getting into histology, the study of the tissues of the body. Now, I will preface this with a message saying that take your time on this lab, get to know these tissues. Historically, histology is a bit of a difficult topic because a lot of these pictures are going to look very similar to each other. We're going to talk about some of the key differences when we look at them, but you'll really want to take your time on this lab and have that lab guide handy as you go through it. So let's introduce what a tissue is. Now this is a level above cells. So a cell would be our smallest unit of life. A tissue would be a collection of those cells, specifically cells that look the same and do the same kind of job that are found working together. So it's a group of cells working together to perform some particular type of job or function. And we have four main categories of tissues: muscle, epithelial, connective, and nervous. So those are our four main categories of tissues. We'll kind of tease them apart as we go through this video, but those are our four main categories. Organs is a level above tissues. So an organ is a group of tissues, so different tissues that are working together to fill in some particular role. So if we look at something like the liver, that would be an organ. The liver is going to have connective tissues throughout, epithelial tissues, nervous tissues, muscle tissues, all working together to perform its main function of a liver. So tissues are specific. We're looking at cells that look the same, act the same, do the same kind of job, and organs are collections of tissues working together to perform a higher function, and each of those tissues is going to contribute to the organ's function in a slightly different way. So let's get into one of the big categories we have, and that is epithelial tissues. Epithelial tissues are mainly for forming some sort of lining or barrier, either on the inside of the body, lining things like body cavities and organs, as well as the outside of our body. So one epithelial tissue you can see right now is on your skin. Your epidermis is an epithelial tissue. When we are organizing and naming epithelial tissues, we organize it based off of how many layers they have. So we have three different ways to organize epithelial tissue based on layers. One layer, two or more layers, and then one layer that kind of looks like it might be more. It's not very even. One layer or one cell layer would be considered simple epithelial tissue. So one single layer of cells across. If we have two or more layers, now we can call that epithelial tissue stratified. And if we only have one layer, but we're organized in such a way that it looks like there could be two or so layers, we call that pseudo-stratified. Like it looks like it might be more than one layer, but it's not really. That's what the name means. Stratified, you think two or more, but pseudo, meaning fake. We also name them based on the shape the cells take: squamous, cuboidal, and columnar. Squamous being flat cells that look kind of like little pancakes, cuboidal being cube-like, and columnar being column-like, meaning they're taller than they are wide. So let's look at these different shapes and layers in terms of how we would name these epithelial tissues. So we have our layers up here, and that will always be the first part of the epithelial tissue's name. So any tissue, any epithelial tissue you're looking at will start with simple, stratified, or pseudo-stratified, followed by the shape, squamous, cuboidal, or columnar. And we see that here. We see here is a simple squamous epithelium or epithelial tissue. So simple tells us one single layer. We see it's one layer across. Squamous tells us we're these kind of squished down, flattened cells. So I like to remember squamous like if you were squashed. That might help you remember that. Stratified squamous, we see we still have that flattened shape, but now we have 1, 2, 3, 4, about 5 layers of cells. Again, it doesn't matter how many as long as it's 2 or more. So if you have 3 layers, you're stratified. If you have 100 layers, you're still stratified. We look at the cuboidal ones. Again, we see that they're about cube shaped, so they're about as tall as they are wide. Simple being 1 layer, and stratified, we have 2 layers here. And then we get down to the columnar area, and now we're adding in the pseudostratified. So you really don't see pseudostratified with the squamous or the cuboidal. It's kind of limited to the columnar cells. And we see how it's not very even. Like here, our simple cuboidal